Welcome to Whiskey's a Journey. My name is Peter Faciano. Today is Monday. This is my series where I take a whiskey, in this case, Blanton's Gold, and I do an in-depth review. Like always, I'm going to pour it, nose it, taste it, talk about it a little bit, and then I'm going to add water to it. And then if you stick around until the very end, I'm going to give this thing a score. So we are looking at Blanton's Gold. This is a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey coming in at 103 proof. I had to look. It was 103 proof because the normal Blanton's comes in at 93 proof. A couple of stats on this as well. We're looking at a dump date of February 12th of 2025. And it looks like it's always warehouse H and then Rick number 11, and it's barrel number 161. And I don't know about this registration bottle, but there's a registration number of 223. And if anyone's curious, there is a letter T on the little gold horsey here. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. I ended up picking this up at just a grocery store, a Safeway, and it was $165. It is coming out of the Buffalo Trace distillery, and it has the mash bill number 2 designation, and I do believe that's the higher rye of the 2 mash bills that they have. And pretty much that is it. So let's go ahead and get this thing on the nose, tell you what I think of it. And just also a reminder, this is the beginning of July, so I have a July giveaway happening. If you're interested in supporting the channel, all the rules to the giveaway are in the description below. This is classic Buffalo Trace. I end up getting, not on all Buffalo Trace, but the majority of them, I get a grape popsicle stick note that comes through on the nose and sometimes on the taste. And there's a classic bourbon notes, honey, vanilla, brown sugar, and caramel. And it's heavily on the honey side. I don't really get a lot of honey on some of the bourbons, but in Blanton's, honey is pretty much up front along with the vanilla. A little bit of spice, but not a whole lot to talk about or to dominate the nose. Just smells like an all-around good tasting or a well-rounded, nicely balanced bourbon. Let's see if that comes through on the palate. So cheers, everybody. Yeah, it's just classic. Honey, brown sugar, vanilla, caramel. That popsicle stick note hits halfway back, mid-palate, sinks underneath the tongue. That grape note, along with the honey, vanilla, brown sugar, and caramel, all kind of melt together, and it just washes over the tongue as a very nice tasting basic bourbon. I'm surprised I'm not getting as much spice as I thought I would. There is a little bit there on the tongue, just like everything else, but it elevates to a point where it is a background note and it's not dominant, which I kind of like. There is enough sweet and spice here to play off of one another, and I can see this being a very nice, refreshing, as far as like a refreshing bourbon can go. It would be a nice, refreshing summer drink. Maybe throw a big old rock into a rocks glass, like a big ice cube, and just kind of let it melt. This would be something that I can see myself sipping outside in the shade around the pool. Nothing spectacular, nothing mind-blowing. This is not something that is very confusing. I think it just fits a good pocket of bourbon, just right over home plate of brown sugar, caramel, vanilla, and honey. Touch of spice, a little bit of oak, everything's well balanced. That was my very first sip. Let me get a second sip in, concentrate on the finish, see how long it lasts, and then we'll add some water to it and then talk a little bit about Blanton's. All right, second sip, everybody. Acclimating a little bit more spice, a little bit more oak, but it is still an all-around, well-balanced, sweet and spiced bourbon. It's not viscous, but because of that honey note that I'm getting on the palate, reminds me of how thick a honey can be on the palate. So this could be a false of security or a false sense of security just because of that honey note is there. I associate honey with viscosity, so that might be tricking me a little bit because, to be honest, it's not really sticking. It doesn't have a whole lot of weight to it, and the finish is medium. I don't even think this comes close to approaching a long finish at all. But the power of suggestion and your minds can play tricks on you, and I think that honey note is making me think that this is more viscous than it actually is. All around, very good tasting. Let me go ahead and add some water to this, And I want to briefly talk about Blanton's. I've done a Blanton's review in the past. It was just the normal, what was it, a normal 93 proof version of it, a single barrel. And that's going to come into play here when I give this a score. My scores seem to be pretty fluid depending upon where you're at in your journey. You might be scoring something higher or lower based on when and where you tasted the actual whiskey. And I think this is going to play a part in me shifting my score on the original Blantons that I reviewed. Which brings me to the history of Blantons. If I'm not mistaken, and please let me know in the comments down below if I'm wrong about this information, but I do believe Blanton's was the very first commercially available mass marketed single barrel bourbon, and it hit the market in 1984. It was developed by Elmer T. Lee to commemorate, I always forget his name, Colonel Albert B. Blanton. Colonel Albert B. Blanton was associated with the distillery. I don't know if he ever got up to master distiller. I should have done my research before I got onto this video. Let me know if he actually ever did hit master distiller. But Elmer T. Lee was the master distiller. And to pay respects to Blanton, he ended up producing and releasing this to the public because Blanton would go into Warehouse H and I believe pick some pretty good single barrels and give them out to family and friends. So to honor him, Elmer T. Lee ended up doing the same thing. And up to this point, I do believe all Blantons, and again, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below, I think all Blantons come out of Warehouse H. And Blanton's Gold being produced at being released at a higher proof, this was available export only, and then only until recently they brought that export only now to release in the United States. And I don't know about you, but Buffalo Trace is now flooding the Phoenix area. We're getting E.H. Taylor, we're getting Eagle Rare. We've always had the normal standard Buffalo Trace, but we're seeing it on the shelves. They do disappear, but we're constantly getting it replenished every other week, and it's starting to see that it is pretty much shelf stable. Blanton's is not quite there just yet, but they are definitely popping up in the market much more frequently than in the past. And I haven't seen this go through the Weller lineup or anything else, so time will tell if all of the other different lineups from Buffalo Trace start to follow suit. I hope so, because it's a brand that I like that I would like to see more of. So that's pretty much it as far as Blanton's goes. If you have any other additional information that would be interesting, do me a favor, just post it in the comments down below so people can read up on it. And let's see what the water has done to this, if anything at all. So let's get it on the nose and then on the palate. All right, a little bit more oak is coming through, and oak in a bad way. It smells like there is a little bit of, not rotted wood, but it's wood on the brink of turning a little bit musty or moldy. And I'm not particularly fond of that note. All of those subtle notes of the caramel, brown sugar, vanilla, and honey have disappeared. I no longer get the grape note at all. And it has definitely killed any amount of spice that this had originally. So I don't think my hopes are up on the palate. So let me go ahead and get this thing on palate, tell you what I think with the water. Not that this was intense or concentrated or it had a whole lot of depth to it to begin with, but whatever complexity was there without the water is now completely gone with the water. What I'm left over is a tremendous amount of oak and a higher elevation of spice. The fruity note is now nondescript. I no longer can pick out any of the individual sweet components of what a typical bourbon would be. And it is coming across as a little bit mentholy as well. So going forward, I don't think I would add water to this. I would just drink it neat the way that it is, or maybe in a rocks glass with a big old chunk of ice. So let's go ahead and move on to the score. If you're new here, I rate everything out of 5 stars. And I need to bring in the other Blantons to compare this to. Since it is Blanton's, one's a little bit higher proof than the other. I rated my original Blanton video at a 3.95. I am going to shift that down to a 3.9 and replace it with this at a 3.95. So my normal Blanton's, 3.9, and I'll adjust that in my document. There's a link in the description. You can just highlight it and open that up. It opens up a document, and it has all of my sip or skip tallies up to this point, along with all of my Monday review scores. So if you go to Blanton's, you're going to see an adjusted score down to 3.9, and this is going to take the place of it at a 3.95. I can't put this at a 4. I mean, it is an overall experience. It is expensive, and just a couple of more proof points, I don't think this has enough complexity, depth, or lasting finish that would push it into a 4 category. It's a really good tasting, straight over home plate bourbon with a little bit of elevated proof, with a little bit more concentration of those typical bourbon notes. It's not confusing. It's not something that you're going to be able to sit down and dissect for hours and hours and hours. All right, so that's all I have for you today. Wherever you're at in your journey, I hope you're enjoying it. We'll talk to everybody later. Bye.